Hi, I'm here to talk to you about Othello, and I introduced this video with drowning pools, bodies. And if you listen to the lyrics, you can go on YouTube it and listen to it. One of the lyrics is, besides let the bodies hit the floor, nothing's wrong with me. And something's got to give. Let the bodies hit the floor. Now, I'm not advocating violence. That's not the reason I played that music for you. What I am saying is it encapsulates Shakespearean tragedy, because in any tragedy that Shakespeare writes, bodies are going to hit the floor. So this is the play of Othello by William Shakespeare. And one of the very first lines in the play is spoken by Iago, the villain, "Sblood." Now your book, if you go down and look at the footnote for it, will say that that means, what is it, God's blood? Let's see, by God's blood. On the other hand, Shakespeare wasn't that simple and that facile. If we take off the apostrophe right there and add the words, add the letters and the word, it is blood. And that is what's going to happen in this tragedy. Now, I can't find my rag. I found it. Because we need more space on this. What you have here is Shakespeare is the renowned playwright in the English language. He is the giant. And he's written here a tragedy that's based in jealousy and steeped in jealousy. You're going to see different characters. So the characters that you're going to need to remember and follow are, of course, Othello. And Othello is a general. And he's been hired by Venice to protect that part of Italy. And he marries Desdemona, which seems very simple on the surface, that someone gets married, unless you've ever had to actually plan a marriage or a marriage ceremony. But they don't do it publicly, they elope. There are a couple of problems with this. One is that Othello is called the Moor of Venice. That means, at the time, the black Muslim in Venice, Italy. And it happens that Desdemona comes from the upper class, and she's white. So we have a black Moor and a white woman getting married. And just as recently in our country's history, that is frowned upon, the mixing of the races. So you're going to see racist discourse in this play. Othello will be described as having fat lips, for example. I point this out to you not to endorse the racism, but Shakespeare is reflecting his time. All right, now, so Othello is the main character, except that he has many less lines than Iago. Iago is the villain. He's the one who starts the play out by saying, "Sblood." It is blood, not what the book says, all right? It's blood. blood. And he is the ancient or the advisor for the general Othello. And he's mad because Othello passed him up for promotion to lieutenant and instead chose Cassio. And Cassio is a faithful soldier to Othello. Iago is going to vow to torment Othello because he didn't get the promotion, because amazingly enough, guess who Iago cares about in this play? Only about himself and money and power. And so he is going to make it his life's work to ruin Othello's life and the life of Desdemona. Now Iago is a twisted person. He is the villain of villains in a way. Even Disney's movie Aladdin has Iago being the villain, and they did that purposefully. Before I go on with the play, I want to talk to you a little bit about the history of theater and Shakespeare himself. So Shakespeare wrote 37 plays in his lifetime. He was alive from 1564 to 1616. So he's been dead for more than 400 years. And yet, we still talk about his production because what he tended to write about, even when he wasn't doing tragedies, he always wrote, because he did tragedies, comedies, histories, he always wrote about people and the psychology of people and what makes them tick. Now, I want you to, obviously, let me spell Shakespeare's name right. Obviously, Shakespeare, like I say, is the giant of playwriting in the English language. But just as an alternative or a juxtaposition to him, in Spain at the same time, was a playwright named Lope de Vega. Shakespeare wrote 37 plays. He also wrote a bunch of sonnets. Lope de Vega lived from 1562, so he was born a couple years earlier, but he outlived Shakespeare by a long shot to 1635, so he had 17 more years. During that time, and Lope is the father of Spanish theater, and he wrote not 37 plays, he wrote more than 1,500 full-length plays, more than 500 religious plays, plus novels. And Cervantes, the author of Don Quixote, called him un monstruo de la naturaleza, a monster of nature, or I read a translation today that called him a genius of nature. But it means a monster of nature. He was out of control. So that's good that Shakespeare wrote 37 full-length plays. Lope wrote more than 2,000 plays during his lifetime. He would often write plays, multiple plays at the same time. you may wonder, why don't we talk about Lope de Vega then? Well, of course, this is English literature, so he doesn't qualify. But Lope tends to get ignored, I think, because he comes from Spain, and Spain was the empire. And once Spain was defeated by the English, why would you celebrate the cultural contribution that Spain has made? You want to turn it back to what the English have done. Lope wrote plays. Perhaps his most top play is Fuente Ovejuna, or The Sheep Well, which is a play about socialism in the sense of standing together against tyranny. And so when an abusive minister gets murdered and an investigation happens, everybody in that town, when they're asked who killed him, says, Sheepwell did it, meaning they all took full responsibility. Because of that, nobody could get punished, and the king ended up pardoning everybody. He also wrote Castigo sin venganza, or Punishment Without Vengeance, which has to do with uxoricide. And I want you to memorize this word. Uxoricide, which is wife killing. And uxoricide is what is going to happen in Othello. So as much as you really get into liking, not my rooster, but Desdemona, Othello's wife, she's going to die. She's going to die. And some might say, well, why would there be so many plays about wife killing during the Renaissance? And why? Because theater is a mirror of society. And wife killing was common, just as it is today. There's not a week that goes by that I don't read about a husband killing his wife here in the United States, or a boyfriend, which is the same thing, because in the Renaissance you didn't have to have a marriage certificate. But we're talking about jealous men trying to control women, and if they can't control them, then they kill them. Shakespeare was a businessman. He built a theater called the Globe. He built it 2 times in his life because it burned down when they were, I think, doing Henry VIII, and they actually fired cannon shots, or fake cannon shots, out towards the audience, and it caught the whole globe on fire and burned it down. Shakespeare named his theater that he built the Globe because for Shakespeare, that theatrical space was symbolic of the entire world. And because of that, there was no roof on the middle part of this theater, so you could look up to the heavens. You could look down to the earth, which was the stage. And there was a trap door. On the stage that Shakespeare referred to as the hell. And that's how actors could get on and off the stage magically. Now, Shakespeare understood his audience, and he needed to make money. And so he wrote in a way to please royalty, aristocrats, wealthy people, and what was called the groundlings, or poor people. Because Because you have to remember that there was no television, there was no theater back during this time, and everybody wanted entertainment. And royalty would come and sit up in the very upper seats, which is anathema to us today, because if you go to a concert and you have really great seats, that means you're stage side. But not back during this time in the Elizabethan period. It was upper meant that you were higher up, and then the rich people would be on the lower parts of the seats, and then the groundlings, the poor people, who would be charged different prices, by the way, they didn't have seats. They just had to stand there or sit there and make a picnic to be able to watch the play in the middle of the grounds. So we're talking about a theater that has seats up top, no roof in the middle, seats that go down, that are far away from the stage, that circle the whole thing, and then people who had what I'd consider the best seats, but there were no seats there for them. And so Shakespeare would tip his hat to the royalty because he wanted to keep working. He would flatter the rich people, and he would also have actors who talked in a way that the groundlings could understand, and many times in crass ways. Shakespeare was happy to make dirty jokes. Now, one thing that he wasn't happy with was that it came into fashion during his lifetime to have dogs on stage. He refused to do that, and he made fun of other playwrights for doing that. Also, to have children on stage. Shakespeare was not interested in having child actors. And you can understand why. They're a lot more difficult to work with. You have to work around their nap times, their education, etc. One other thing that I want to point out is that because of Puritan influence in England, women were not allowed on stage in Shakespeare's time. He hated that. He absolutely hated it. He wanted to have actresses on the stage. So he would make fun of that. So imagine this. You go to see Romeo and Juliet. It's this great love story. And what it is a young man pursuing a young woman who is also a young man cross-dressed as a woman. It doesn't seem as interesting, does it? Now, Spain, on the other hand, because it was still Catholic, unlike the Protestantism and Puritanism in England, they had women actors throughout their history. So imagine this play being done by all men. All of the female parts are done by men. And obviously, if you're a man that's going to play a female part, you probably want to have a younger man that doesn't have a beard like me. On the other hand, in Macbeth, Shakespeare has the Weird Sisters, who represent the three fates. They're all bearded men, and there's talk about, and they're supposed to be women, and there's talk about, those are the strangest looking women I have ever seen. By the way, I can see that I'm sweating through my shirt. It's 90 degrees right now. It might be hot in your world right now, I don't know. My machine says that it's the equivalent of 103 with the humidity, so you're going to have to look past this part. All right, going back to the history of theater, which Shakespeare drew on, and that's how the Renaissance happened, is that Greek theater was saved by Muslims because Christians tried to destroy it, and they did. Muslims actually gathered knowledge to them and then started giving that Western knowledge back to the West, and that helped spark the Renaissance. And so Shakespeare had examples of how the Greeks did theater. And the Greeks did theater as festivals, as religious rites, and people would go and eat and drink and party and fall in love and couple and mate. Now Aristotle who is Plato's student, and Plato was Socrates' student. He is the very first literary critic. He's the person who came up with the idea of encyclopedias. He wrote about tragedy, Greek tragedy. He wrote about a lot more than that, but when he wrote about Greek tragedy, he talks about the three unities. So, for example, in the play Oedipus, and the three unities that Greek tragedy would follow were that you had to have one place, one time, and one action arc. One place, you don't move locations, period. One time, it means that the play has to occur within 24 hours. One action, no subplots. Shakespeare looked at that sort of idea and he threw it out the window. So at one moment, you can be in one country and another in another. You have the main plot and the main characters, but you also have subplots going on. And he didn't care about the 24-hour time limit because that wasn't convenient for him. And so actors will come out on the stage and announce that 3 months have passed, for example, or the season has changed. So Shakespeare throws out the three unities from Aristotle. Just as an example, Oedipus King is what it's called, or Oedipus Rex. That's the first translation I ever read that in, which means king, like Tyrannosaurus Rex, who really wasn't the king lizard, by the way, or the king tyrant. You have Oedipus appearing in front of his castle, talking to the people, and all of the action takes place in one day in front of the castle, and there are no subplots. One other important concept that Aristotle identifies is the concept of catharsis, which translates as purgation of emotion. Aristotle understood that theater actually served a social purpose and helped people remain good citizens instead of following all their desires. And so, a really good play should make you laugh, it should make you cry, it should make you angry, and it should make you relieved. And that sort of relief is what catharsis is. Have any of you ever walked out of a movie theater or finished watching a movie and felt absolutely exhausted? That's because you've experienced catharsis. You've experienced a whole world of emotion and then been brought back to rest. And there are some times when you watch really good movies or really good theater where the only thing to do is go home and take a nap because it's been exhausting. Just briefly going back to Lope de Vega, he also wrote La Viuda Valenciana, which was about the widow from Valencia, which is about a young widow who uses a veil in order to be able to have more freedom now that her husband is dead. She also wrote La Boda entre dos maridos, which is a play the play means the play of the marriage between two husbands, where you have two friends who have pledged their fealty to each other, and because of that, because one friend is going to die after the other one's getting married, because he's dying of his long-lost love, and the husband who's getting married says, all right, what we'll do is I'll have her during the daytime and you can have her at night. You can imagine what complications result from something like that. All right. I want you to take special note as you read this play, and I understand that reading Shakespeare is difficult because we're talking about language from 400 years ago, plus it wasn't even the language that was spoken at the time, because he's a poet as well as a playwright. So be patient with yourself and be patient with the text. You're not going to understand every word. I was taught Romeo and Juliet back in 9th grade, and then I was taught King Lear. Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy. Also, King Lear is a tragedy, and I was taught that in 12th grade. And I had to struggle with it. And when I went to college and finally became an English major, I took a class on Shakespeare. And what I would do is I would read the play first. Then I would take the copy of the play I had, and I would go to the library, and I would watch a performance of that particular play and follow along in the text. And that helped me, because plays are meant to be seen and not just read. They're meant to be heard and seen. Heard and seen. So feel free to look at plot summaries for the play, because you can get that on the net. Feel free to go to YouTube and find a performance of Othello that you can follow along with, because it will help you. I believe that Mel Gibson actually starred in a movie of Othello. So that's not cheating, that's trying to make sense out of 400-year-old poetic language. Now, it would be cheating if, when I ask you to respond about Act 1, that you summarize the plot because you were able to pull that right up from Wikipedia or wherever it is that you look. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in you observing what is going on in the play and interested in the language. You're observing the language itself. Now, we have relationships throughout this play, not just of general and soldier, but between men and women. So Othello is married to Desdemona. Iago, the villain, is married to Emilia. And Cassio, who is the consummate bachelor, and who is the lieutenant who got promoted over Iago, he has a prostitute by the name of Bianca. Now, I know, given our culture that is heavily puritanically influenced, we can't have someone who is righteous sleeping with a prostitute. On the other hand, what you will see is that Cassio actually is the faithful one. He is the good person. He's not perfect, right? But Iago is the embodiment of evil. And I want you to take special note of what Iago says, not just about his wife, but about Desdemona as well, and about women in general. Because Iago has the penchant for taking anything that's good and making it evil, or anything that's beautiful and making it ugly. And his game plan is to make Othello hate Desdemona because Iago would like to sleep with Desdemona. Now, Iago also has a sidekick who is named Rodrigo. And Rodrigo is a dupe. Iago befriends him only because he has money and he wants to sponge off him. I wonder if any of you have ever had an Iago in your life who wants to use you for your money, or even if it's not just money, use you for your swimming pool that you have, or use you for the car that you have, or use you because you have Nintendo, or what's the latest in the gaming scene?
PlayStation 4, Xbox One.
PlayStation 4, Xbox One, or you have internet, or you actually have a mom that cooks really well, and somebody who uses you for what you can give back. Iago uses Rodrigo for his money. Rodrigo has been in love with Desdemona. And Iago keeps promising him that pretty soon you're going to be able to shack up with her. All right, good. So let's get started with the text. Now, in this book, it's located on page 580. It doesn't matter what book you have, you can follow along. The first word out of Iago's mouth in Act 1 is splud, which, as I said to you, the book says by God's blood. But I think that Shakespeare is playing with the metaphor. It is blood as well. And he's talking to his dupe, his friend, Rodrigo, about what he's going to do. And he is angry with Othello. So if you go over to line about 42, Iago says, "Oh, sir, I content you," because Rodrigo's asked him, why would you follow Othello? He says, don't worry about me. I follow him to serve my turn upon him, meaning that I'm going to get back at Othello. That is why. And I want you to notice that Iago often talks in monetary discourse. Which is a fancy way of saying money words. So he says later on about line 48, for naught but provender, and when he's old, cashiered. So he wants to cashier Othello. And think about that. When the cash register opens, when you're in the store, doesn't that mean the transaction is getting finished? He wants to finish him. So he goes on to talk about in this same part, others there are who trimmed in forms and visages of duty. So there are other people who look like they're faithful followers, keep yet their hearts looking at themselves. And that's exactly who Iago looks out for, is himself. And throwing but shows of service on their lords, do well thrive by them. And once they have lined their coats or their pockets, so they act like they're faithful, they do themselves homage. These fellows have some soul, and such as one do I profess myself. So Iago, right off the bat, not only says it's blood, but he bastardizes the idea of what it means to have a soul. In Christian tradition, a soul means that you have awareness, so understanding, memory, and free will. He's saying that the only people with souls are the ones who exploit their superiors for their own purposes. So in this way, one could say that Iago is the devil. And guess what he's going to call Othello? The devil. Everything Iago says is blasphemous. And so he says later on in about verse 56, it's as sure as you are, Rodrigo, if I were the Moor, I would not be Iago. And the Moor meaning Othello. In following him, I follow but myself. I follow but myself. And you probably had experience with people who are like that, who act friendly, but in the long term you realize They're just in it for themselves. Heaven's my judge, not for love and duty, but seeming to do love and duty for my peculiar end. So he's doing everything for his own purposes. And then he makes the phrase, if you go to page 582, it's line 65 about. So he says, but I will wear my heart upon my sleeve, for das to peck at. I am not what I am. I am not what I am. Now, hopefully, you've had enough experience with the biblical tradition to hear some sort of echo in there. I am not what I am. And that's because Iago has turned the phrase, or Shakespeare has had Iago turn the phrase, when Moses was up on the mountain and finally agreed, okay, I'll go do what you told me to do. And then Moses is getting ready to leave, and he says, but wait, who shall I say has sent me when I go confront Pharaoh? And the God of the Old Testament says, I am who I am. I am who I am, and you can go and look that up if you want. And that's in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. Tell them I am sent you. Can you imagine Moses' frustration when he gets there and Pharaoh says, and who sent you? Me. Okay? But being authentic. This is authenticity. I am who I am. On the other hand, Iago is, I am not what I am. And then here we have the first reference from Rodrigo of racist discourse, which I'd like you to keep track of. Now, Rodrigo calls Othello the thick lips. And that is on line like 66 or something like that. Okay? Thick lips. So looking at Othello's African heritage and making fun of the way his body looks. And then he starts doing, so this is part of racist discourse that runs throughout this play. Okay. And Iago ends up telling Rodrigo, this is what we should do, because Othello has eloped with Desdemona, and Desdemona's father does not know it. Okay? And her father is Brabantio. Let's go wake him up and tell him that he's being robbed. Because at this time, just as in Old Testament times, and for many thousands of years in Western culture, women were considered property, daughters were considered property. So let's go to his house and call out loud. So Rodrigo says, here is her father's house, I'll call out loud. And then Iago acts as the director of the moment in the play and says, do it with like timorous accent and dire yell and wind by night and echoes as the fire is spied in populous cities. So basically, what I want you to do is say, fire! Okay? So, of course, Rodrigo does this. What ho, Brabantio! Senor Brabantio, ho! And Iago says, awake! What ho, Brabantio! Thieves, thieves! Look to your house, your daughter, and your bags. So do you see how in that phrase right there, a daughter is considered the same as luggage, or as storage compartments, or as your house property. And Brabantio gets into the window because he's been woken up and says, "What is all this noise?" Right? And Iago says in line 87, "Zounds, sir, you're robbed. For shame. Get dressed. Put on your gown. Your heart is burst. You've lost half your soul. Even now, very now, an old black ram is tupping your white ewe." All right, so okay, so in this, now I've never heard a wedding night be referred to, compared to goats, right? But that's exactly what Iago does, because he's good at taking something that's beautiful and wholesome and making it sound gross. So in this case, he's calling Othello an old black ram, and he's calling Desdemona a white ewe. And tupping, you could say topping, or you could say fucking. So an old black ram is topping your white ewe. And then he says, "Awake the snorting citizens with the bell, or else the devil will make a grandfather of you, a grandsire." So now Othello is not only a black ram, he is the devil who's going to impregnate the innocent Desdemona. And then there's some dialogue back and forth on page 583 in line 110. Iago says, "Zounds, sir, you are one of those that will not serve God if the devil bid you." Because Brabantio is skeptical of Iago, because Iago has been in his house and put the moves on his daughter when his daughter was single. Brabantio thinks his daughter's single until he gets woken up in the middle of the night. All right? But notice that Iago says, "You won't serve God even if the devil bids you." Which is interesting. It's sort of self-confessional that in this case Iago is the devil and he is God, because he is directing the action, just as the playwright or the director of a play would do. And then he says, "If you don't do what I'm telling you," in line 112, "you'll have your daughter covered with a Barbary horse." So now Othello has become a black horse. "And your nephews will neigh at you, and you'll have courses for cousins and jennets for Germans." So Othello is going to breed with your daughter, and you're going to have a bunch of equine offspring. And then in the final, can you imagine you're a dad, you love your daughter, and someone comes and tells you this sort of stuff? In the final defamation of a conjugal, loving relationship, Iago says, your daughter and the more your daughter and the Moor are making the beast with two backs. Now, I don't know how old you are or what your experiences are in life, whether you're a virgin or not a virgin. I don't really care about that. I can tell you from my experience of being married that I never thought about making love as being the beast with two backs. But that's how much Iago destroys things that are beautiful and sacred. Later on in line 126, Iago calls Othello a lascivious Moor, which means a lustful Moor. Now, these stereotypes about black men still exist in our culture. And they are stereotypes that African American men are lascivious, and you've got to protect your white women from them. My former mother-in-law, so now, my now ex-mother-in-law, she grew up here in Florida, and she talks about the KKK with fond memories. Why? Because she's a white woman, and her analysis of the KKK is that they were just good men trying to protect us from the black men. She's an elected official now. Is that not disgusting? Okay, so even though we're going back 400 years to this play, this idea of black men being lascivious, somehow sexually unbridled, still exists. And then Rodrigo rubs it in and says, your daughter has made a gross revolt against you, tying her will and fortune onto page 584 in an extravagant and wheeling stranger. So now Rodrigo has called him a wheeling stranger, meaning somebody who is unmoored. That's kind of a pun, right? Somebody who wanders around going from woman to woman to woman. And Brabantio by that time has heard enough and says, get me a candle, or in Shakespeare's time, a taper. He exits, and we have Iago define himself some more. And he talks about how in line 157, I must show out a flag and sign of love, so I must deceive Othello. And Brabantio runs inside the house when he's exited, and then he comes back out and says, gone she is, and that's in line 160. And he says later on, 163, oh, unhappy girl, with the Moor, who would be a father? How did you know it was she? She deceives me. Okay, and they're married? Okay, so Iago has manipulated, Brabantio, by all of his fears that, oh my God, my daughter is going to be impregnated by, my white daughter is going to be impregnated by a black man. And Brabantio says what white supremacists say today in line 169. Oh heaven, how did she get out? Treason of the blood. Uh-oh, I have a fly on here. Treason of the blood. And I've listened to racists around me, and as recently as a few months ago, I listened to a man say that white women who are with black men are race traitors. Treason of the blood is what's going on. And unfortunately, this racist discourse continues into our present day society, where we have people protesting against systemic racism, which I am happy that they do. And Brabantio, of course, makes this statement to all the fathers in the audience. Fathers, and this is line 170, fathers, from henceforth trust not your daughters' minds by what they seem them act. So don't trust the way your daughter's behaving. Is there not charms by which the property of youth and maidenhood may be abused? Okay. Notice that he refers to daughters as property, as youth as property, and maidenhood or maidhood is a fancy word for virginity, as his own property. Now, if you're a parent out there, you know, or you'll learn soon, that you can't control what your children do when it comes to who they are falling in love with. You just cannot control that. But Brabantio is saying, you know, watch out, fathers. And then he says to Rodrigo, I wish you had had her. I wish that I had paid attention to your wooing her when she rejected him wooing her. All right, so that's the end of scene 1. Hopefully that sets you up so you can understand who these characters are. I would suggest that because it can help you, and I don't care if you've got a book from dual enrollment where they told you don't write in it. You should write in all your books, period. That's what I do. I'll show you. Okay. I write in all my books. You may also consider the idea of taking different markers and having like blue for Othello or black if you wanted to, or white for Desdemona, leaving her name blank, or you could do black for Iago, but doing different colors of your markers so that you know who is speaking, and that will help you with understanding what is going on. I'll be back with you for some more of Othello. Thank you.